1935, the Lions win the NFL championship. The Detroit Tigers take the World Series. The Red Wings bring home Lord Stanley's Cup. Joe Louis begins his rise to world domination. This transforms the Motor City into Detroit, City of Champions.
There it is, the crack of the bat, the smack of the leather. Is that what you said?
I think that's what we said.
The punch of the leather.
Yeah, the smack of the leather bag, the leather on leather gloves. Yeah,
that's it. We're off and running. Detroit, City of Champions. It's the podcast. We're up to episode 41.
41, man. We're starting to click these things away. And pretty soon it's going to be episode 50. We're going to have balloons.
I know. A cake.
Surprise parties and people running in saying, oh, my God, congratulations, boys. It's your 50th, 50th show.
Thinking about it, we might hit 100 somewhere right around the next Champions Day. So
could be.
That'll be a good goal. So.
Oh, man, that'd be perfect to nail it right on that the 100th show. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So it's Detroit City of Champions going through the 1935 year, a trilogy of books, a screenplay. It's a movie in the making. It's ready to roll. All that stuff written by
Charles Avison.
Yeah, I'm Jamie Flanagan, and Charles is just telling me the stories as we hang out in the Podcast Detroit studios downtown Detroit.
And the thing is, they don't see us before and after the shows. I'm like, the story continues. I'm like, wait, hold on a second. There's one more stuff, Jamie.
Oh my God, there's lots more.
We hang out for like a little bit before and a little after, and we're talking City of Champions. Before and after. It's not just like when the mic turns on.
Oh my God! No, it goes and goes and goes.
Yeah.
And we're talking about just icon in sports and
Joe Louis.
Iconic, because you got to think about how many athletes are enshrined and celebrated in their city. Like Joe Louis is here.
He's enshrined. There's numerous things with Joe Louis. You got the statue of Kowal. You got the fist, the downtown fist.
Right.
I mean, we got a giant fist in downtown Detroit. They had a hockey arena.
The arena named after.
They had a hockey arena named after a boxer.
Yeah.
Okay. So we've got all these things. Yet at the same time, the story of Joe Louis is pitifully unknown.
Yeah.
It's underwhelming. Like there's things out there.
Because if you ask people, tell me about Joe Louis. Oh well, he was a boxer.
Exactly.
He was a really good boxer.
Everybody knows he's a boxer.
He was a really good boxer.
But when you're talking about
he was a Detroit guy, really good boxer.
But if you're talking about like boxing history and influential boxers, especially if you're talking about like black boxers, the name everyone's brain immediately goes to Muhammad Ali.
Yeah.
It jumps right to him.
Right.
And that's where everybody's always like Muhammad Ali. That's where the story of Joe Louis. Who Joe Louis was, the impact that Joe Louis had on his sport, the impact that Joe Louis had on America, the impact that Joe Louis had on all American sports. Like, there's very few people in the history of America. Like, I rank him one of the most important people of the entire 20th century.
Well, he helped break down that color barrier.
Absolutely,
and he inspired. So many people that came after, and they do credit.
They
him.
all credit him. I mean, Jesse Owens, Jackie Robinson, even Muhammad Ali. When Joe Louis died, Muhammad Ali said, "I used to call myself the greatest. Joe was the greatest."
Oh,
that was one of the things
that's touching.
Absolutely.
For Muhammad to suck it up and say that.
Yeah, well, that's what I mean. It wasn't sucking it up. Muhammad,
well, taking in his pride, because would he ever say he's not the greatest?
Well, yeah, it was when Joe died, and there was like eulogies coming out, and it was a quote that I saw it somewhere. Like I think it was the Detroit News or Free Press. I saw that quote.
Beautiful, man.
But that's what I mean. Like, but Joe Louis, what I was saying is that the story of Joe Louis, like where he came from and especially all the events that happened in 1935 to allow him to become what he would become is just one of the most incredible stories that's never been told. Because
we set up
in this year.
I know we set up the pitfalls with Jack Johnson and
laid down
the additional barriers that incredible career. Set up additional barriers for
Joe.
Inadvertently,
and Jack Johnson. I never looked at Jack Johnson as necessarily a bad guy. He was just a guy who wanted to do his own thing, and he had a chance to be himself. And it was, it came at a time when when that was like, they would there was repercussions for other people that would follow him.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm saying. So, we talked about the obstacle of Jack Johnson.
Right.
And then the last couple episodes we talked about, that wasn't just the only obstacle. It was the fact that Joe Louis came from, like, he was the most unlikeliest of heroes.
Sure.
I mean, to come from where he came from, like, especially when you're reading Richard Back's book. I mean, Richard Back has this phenomenal book. It's called The Great Black Hope, by Richard Back. And he does a phenomenal job of talking about the early life of Joe Louis. And I encourage everybody to get to read the book if you're interested in Joe Louis. It's a tremendous book, as I've mentioned a couple times. But it talks about, he paints this beautiful illustration in your mind about, Joe, when he's, growing up until about, I think it was 12 years old when he moved to Detroit. Joe is growing up in this rural Alabama, in the shadow of the Buckaloo Mountains. They're this sharecropper family. He's the seventh of 8 children, and then his mother marries a man, and then there's like 16 children in the entire household.
Yeah.
And then
feeding that through the Depression.
Yeah. Well, yeah. They moved to Detroit for better opportunities. And then, they're moved into Black Bottom, which is a completely different environment for him. He's coming from this, again, deep South rural environment. And then he moves to Detroit, which I think it was the 7th largest city in the country at the time.
Yeah.
It's just everybody, there's this great, they call it the Great Migration happening,
Sure.
where there's millions of people pouring up, into these northern cities. And Joe's, a face amongst millions. This is a guy that has no chance. He's not. He's not good at school.
Right.
He is. He's not necessarily a big guy when he's a kid. He's not he's not aggressive. He's a nice, kind of quiet, shy little kid. Growing up in this crazy environment of Paradise. Where you got in Black Bottom, Detroit, where there's Paradise Valley. There's these, like, he's kind of torn between this strict religious upbringing of his mother, and then the sort of temptations of Paradise Valley, which is like the entertainment district of Black Bottom, Detroit, and he's facing this kind of pull into two directions. And really and he's not really. He's taking woodworking classes,
right.
which he's not going to be the greatest woodworker ever. His mom gets him into violin classes. He's not going to be the next violin maestro.
Right.
Where does he fit? And it's just he's a face in the crowd. It's one of the most unlikely beginnings for anybody to get the breakout. To become what he would become. And that's really what makes the story even better.
So as far as like the purses and the money and the popularity of the sport compared to 1935, because hockey was a smaller sport. The Stanley Cup was still a big deal. It was a big deal in Canada.
Within the hockey world, it was. But
in the Canadian teams, it was
Detroit. It was basically meant nothing. I mean, it's just some random championship
right.
that they don't know anything about it.
Yeah. So, but hockey was a smaller sport. Football and baseball, compared to boxing, the popularity were the
college football was big.
Yeah.
Pro football was not. It was in its total infancy. It had started to grow with a little bit of popularity with like Red Grange. Like in the 20s, there was this like the Roaring 20s. We mentioned the 5. You had the Babe Ruth in baseball, Red Grange in football, Bobby Jones in golf. You had these like these sports had these like sort of iconic. People in it. So Red Grange, Red Grange was really important for pro football, but that's only in the in the 20s and 30s. It really is a evolving sport.
Right.
People, there was still a little bit of a stigma that on professional athletes that they only played for money and that that the college game or the amateur golfers. That's why Bobby
thank
Jones.
God that's changed.
Yeah. Well, but an amateur Bobby Jones was an amateur even when he was like the biggest name, and so they looked at Bobby Jones as as like the epitome of the golfer because he didn't necessarily play for money. He was he maintained his amateur status. Whereas Walter Hagen, who certainly played for money, he was a pure professional, and he was probably one of the big highest paid guys. They kind of looked down on him a little bit. In fact, there's a story we're going to get to Walter Hagen. He's a big Detroit guy.
Yeah.
And so, in Walter Hagen, they wouldn't even let him change in the clubhouses at some of these golf clubs because he was a professional, and they were like, "You're like a paid mercenary." So, the amateur, there was still this mentality. There was this mentality that people that were amateurs or that that didn't take money for playing, like I say, the Bobby Jones. Mm-hmm. that they were pure sports. That's why college football was revered, whereas pro football was looked at as like a mercenary thing.
So compared to baseball, because baseball was pretty big. So with the purses and the popularity and attendance,
baseball was the number one sport. It's not even close.
Okay,
yeah.
So but boxing, whereas boxing was probably number.
Well, boxing
and the
was
purses
big.
were big though.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. That's what we're talking about all the way since the dawn of humankind. People have paid money to see each other, two guys punch each other in the face.
Okay.
They paid money to see women punch each other in the face. They
yeah.
paid money to see dwarves punch each other in the face. You know what I mean? Like, people want to see.
Can we get that now?
What's that?
Dwarves? Can we get that now?
Dude, we're in Detroit, bro. There's all kinds.
Okay.
You can do whatever you want out here, man. But you got the money to watch. There's all kinds of stuff you see. But what I'm saying is that so boxing. Yes, there's absolutely money to be paid in boxing.
Yeah.
But the thing that's sort of different about boxing was there was it's kind of sporadic. You see what I'm saying? Like, there's no like. I mean, there was an organization. You have the the main,
but there wasn't a season, and there wasn't game after game.
But there wasn't necessarily like a route that you followed to get to the pinnacle of boxing. Sure, there were belts. Sure, there was titles. There was the Gold Gloves tournament, which was really the title of the show, what we're going to be talking about today. The Gold Gloves were certainly a route for an amateur to become a professional, but it was really upon like that the individual boxer to kind of make a name for themselves, to make it so that people wanted to see them fight.
Yeah.
Because if you're just watching two guys punch each other in the face, it's nothing. But it's you're watching two people that are like the champion of this versus the champion of that, and then they come together. Now we want to see it. Now it's interesting. The champion of Chicago versus the champion of Detroit, or the champion of like a Polish champion versus this. And so we even talked about it on a previous episode with boxing, how a lot of these promoters, in order to build the interest for these fights, would use like race or nationality to pit like a black fighter versus a white fighter. Who was a black champion? Like they had they called it the official title being the colored champion versus the white champion.
Right.
Or like they would use those nationalities and differences because they would convey the stereotypes with it, and to see who is the better. It breeds interest, and it still breeds interest to this day. People pit different races and colors against each other in the arena for everything, for politics, for everything. It's still one of the things that people use to hype up for money and all this other stuff. But anyways, so in the case of Joe Louis, the route to the thought of becoming like a heavyweight champion of the world was like going to Mars or going to the moon. I mean, it's like almost an impossible dream. But what did pique his interest was the idea that even as an amateur boxer, that he could win like merchandise vouchers for just for fighting against local characters in Detroit and these like back room sort of beer halls and wherever, people, there's always going to be somebody to pay even a couple bucks to watch a fight, even if it's just two random unknowns. Yeah. And so, so the Brewster we talked about last episode, the Brewster Recreation Center became a major spot for these people, for these guys.
It spawned a lot of
a ton of
there were a lot of very
big
successful
names that came out of the Brewster.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And Joe, the unlikeliest of them all.
Yeah, absolutely. And Joe, there was a point where there was so many good up and coming boxers coming out of the Brewster Recreation Center that they even said that Joe wasn't even the best one. Yeah, he wasn't, and we're going to see today. You could actually make a case for another guy. Stanley Evans had more hype, had more we're going to talk about how he beat Joe.
Right.
Like there's other guys that had bigger sort of names attached to themselves, but there's one thing. There is one thing that fight fans covet above all else.
What was that?
And there's one thing that Joe Louis possessed that gave him an advantage, an increasing advantage the longer his fights went on, the longer his career went, the longer he stuck with boxing. Yeah. And he loved the sport. He loved the road work. He loved the training. He loved the science of boxing. He found a sport that he felt that he fit into, and a place that he fit into in this group of guys that he would train with at the Brewster, that they fought each other, that they all kind of dreamed together, that they participated in amateur fights in groups together. Yeah. So he sort of found a niche to fit in. I think that was initially that he loved. The idea that he could win a little extra money for merchandise vouchers and have fun. But like I say, there's one thing that Joe possessed, from the beginning, and it would increasingly grow in value, which was the ability to knock people out. The ability, it doesn't matter in boxing. Boxing, the primary skill, the thing that attracts viewers, the thing that attracts, we talk about like the hype machine for the different fights, is when you got a fighter that can knock people out. Okay, not just there's of course there's like the boxing style, which is like the points or whatever, where a boxer another wins on points, he gets more points per round or whatever it is, like this.
Right.
But there is nothing like
that knockout.
But there is nothing that boxing fans crave more than watching a guy knock somebody out.
Yeah.
And that is what Joe possessed. From an early on, like we're going to see here, he was raw. But like I say, but the thing about it is that these fight fans, the more that Joe was knocking people out and showing them these power punches, the more that people are starting to take notice of him, and that's what separated him from the crowd.
All right.
As we're about to get to.
So
today's episode, we title the episode Golden Gloves.
Yes.
Because in the last episode we left off, where again where Joe is training in this gym with the Brewster. But so now we're in 1933. And Joe Louis is Joe's birthday is in May, so he's 18 years old to start the year. He would finish the year as 19 years old.
Okay.
So he's 18 years old. So Joe has been training. He's fought several different amateur fights, not too many, but he's fought several. He lost his first fight against Johnny Myler. He responded strongly with another knockout of this other guy. But his first really big test was in the 1933 Detroit Gold Glove Tournament.
All right.
In order to understand the Gold Gloves, for maybe people that aren't sort of like really in tune with boxing, I just want to give kind of a brief rundown of the concept of it. Okay. So basically, the Gold Glove Tournament is open to amateurs, and it's really open to anybody. Anybody can join. Okay. And so the first Gold Glove Tournament was in Chicago in 1929. All right, and the Gold Glove Tournament was introduced to Detroit in 1931. So Chicago was the nationals. That's where you wanted to go.
Okay.
So all the cities around the country that had Gold Glove tournaments, you would win your tournament, and then you would come to Chicago for the nationals. That was the idea. But it was open to pretty much everybody, and there was two open classes. You had the novice class and the open class. So the novice class is as the name implies. It's basically like, very raw bone sort of rookies, very new to to this is like their first tournament type of thing. And then the open class is basically, as the name also implies, it's open to like somewhat veterans. I mean, you can be like, you can pretty much be whatever age you want to join the open class. You can have as much experience as you want. So,
okay.
So there's two different classifications. There's novice and open, and there was 8 weight classes between each of those. Divisions, between open and novice. And so as a result, there were 16 total champions awarded. And so, of course, the highest level was the heavyweight, and Joe competed as a light heavyweight. So because of his weight, so he was just a tick below the full-on heavy. So they call him a light heavyweight. Okay, in this time. And so the way that it worked was it was open to all, and this is what was interesting. It's open to all races, black, white, any race. Anybody can take part in the Gold Gloves. There'd be a couple thousand entrants into the tournament, like a couple thousand, because Detroit was a main hub for boxing. There was a big boxing town at the time.
All right.
And so it would be a 6-week single elimination tournament that ran from January to February with fights at various venues across the city. So these 2,000 fighters, they would sign up, turn in their slip or whatever, and they would fight. They would get, slotted to fight around the city somewhere. And so boxing fans would be all over the place watching these different fights. They'd want to go watch welterweight or lightweight.
And these
or
are
heavyweight.
prelims for the
Exactly.
Right.
And and as you lost, you would get your name crossed off, and then you would advance to bigger and bigger venues until the final venue, the grand finale, was at Olympia Stadium. That was the grand finale, and all the major people would go there. Yes. So in 1933, Joe enters the Detroit Gold Gloves, and he has 6 straight knockouts to win the light heavyweight to win the light heavyweight novice class.
Okay.
So he was entered as a novice. This is his first tournament, and he has 6 straight knockouts to win in that class. Okay. So he advances to Chicago for the nationals, but he lost to his Brewster stablemate. A Brewster boxer named Clinton Bridges on points. Keep in mind, he didn't get knocked out. He lost on points.
Okay.
Yes, and so then that summer he would end up losing a fight. He would lose a fight that summer to another Brewster stablemate. This is like I don't want to say an exhibition because it went on his record, but he lost a fight to Stanley Evans, who was going to become his main rival as far as the biggest up and comers in Detroit at that time.
All right.
And so we actually have a picture of Stanley Evans. It's a very, very rare photo. This is from my book.
Okay.
This was a very difficult photo to find.
Really?
Yes. And so so we have a picture of Stanley Evans. It's a very, very rare.
1933 amateur fight.
Go ahead and Google him. I doubt. I don't think you'll even find anything on Google. This is something that's straight out of a newspaper.
Okay.
So anyways, and so he lost to Stanley Evans. But despite Joe losing to Stanley Evans in this, the fact that he has these 6 straight knockouts, as I mentioned, it's this knockout power that Joe has that catches people's interest, and he caught the attention of a Detroit businessman named John Roxborough. Okay. And so in a previous episode, we introduced Ben Turpin, the Detroit policeman who would sort of stave Joe off from making a terrible decision and joining this gang, and sort of kept him away from, Joe was sort of literally at a pivotal moment where he's going to go join this gang or he's going to go home to mama, and Ben Turpin, this policeman, pushed him in the direction to go home to mama instead of his life. So John Roxborough is going to become the second major male influence besides his father. Besides that, I'm talking about it towards his career. John Roxborough is going to become a second and very important influence on his career. And so just a little brief kind of rundown about John Roxborough. We have an image of him too. So John Roxborough is a fairly well-known rich black businessman in Detroit. Okay, and the way that he had earned his money was. Some people were like, "Oh, he was kind of like a criminal. There's a little bit of dark money or whatever." But the way that he made his money was he was sort of an opportunist. Okay, his brother was the first. His brother was Michigan's first black legislature. Okay.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
Okay.
So he originally he was going to go to law school. He comes. He came from somewhat reputable beginnings. He's like. He had initially was going to go to law school and that, but he was like, I want to make money. I don't want to sit in school for years. And he thought that he had the aptitude to make money without having to do the whole college thing. And as it turned out, he certainly did, because he started off as a bail bondsman, and while he's a bail bondsman, he bailed out a numbers runner from Kansas City, who taught him, in thanks for bailing him out and getting him sort of out of the trouble that he was in at that moment, he brought John Roxborough to Kansas City and taught him the numbers racket. And it's important, I want to stop for a second and explain the numbers racket.
Yeah, what is it?
And the general.
It's a racket.
Yeah, so people here talking about the number, running numbers is a term that you hear in movies and that. But the numbers racket is basically like a lottery system. Okay, before you see how people love to play the lottery.
Yeah,
I mean everybody. The lottery's huge, right?
Oh, yeah.
So in this era, there was no lottery necessarily. No. And so what it would do was you would have slips, right? You would have slips, and you would say you would give a neutral number.
Are we teaching people how to run numbers?
Well, yeah, but it's almost irrelevant now. we can teach them how to run numbers, but it's almost irrelevant because there's a state numbers running. If the lottery, the state runs numbers now with the lottery
every day, yeah, powerful.
Exactly, yeah.
All right, but keep going. You got a slip.
The primary component of the numbers is that you have a neutral number that everybody agrees upon is going to be the number that is drawn, and that you don't control it necessarily. That it's that everybody trusts the picking of the number. So the numbers runner would, in essence, say the number, the horse that finished, the number of the horse that finishes in second place in the Santa Anita Handicap this Thursday is the number that wins on the thing, right?
All right.
Or some number that's a mutually agreed upon that there's no possible way that gambler, that the person who's issuing those tickets could have, could influence.
Sure.
And so, anyways, and so then they would issue like in football how they do the numbers for a game. How you bet on the football numbers, and you pick your number. Once you get that number, you pay $5 to get it, and then nobody else can take that number.
Yeah.
That's kind of how the numbers game works. Is you go around the city and you hand out and you sell. You sell in essence lottery tickets, and each person gets to scratch off that number that they want.
All right.
And then the numbers runner makes their money because like they take in $1,000, and then the winner wins like $700.
Right.
You know what I mean? And they keep the three.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
it works.
For running the numbers.
Sure.
And so as a result, John Roxborough took over, dominant, especially he's coming up in this era. He moves to Detroit, and he's like, he evolves this numbers racket at a time when Detroit is, blooming, exploding in the black bottom. He's running numbers in black bottom, and he's making himself a fortune.
And he came across Joe, and he liked
so
him?
one more step. I'm going to give you a little more background.
All right,
So he takes the money that he's making off numbers running and making off the numbers, and he's investing it in real estate.
Okay.
So he crosses over into legitimate business. So he is. That's why people say he's a semi-disreputable character. That's how he's sometimes described. But
where was he buying up real estate?
I don't have that specific information.
But I didn't know if it was in Black Bottom.
I'm sure it was. I'm sure he invested some of it. But that was the other thing, was that one of the things he was known for was that he was a philanthropist.
Right.
Like he put money into like local community projects and in local community businesses and like let people borrow money. Then there were Richard Back talks about in his book how like a lot of these like Negro League baseball teams were financed in their city by people that ran numbers and did these sort of that just like people like John Roxborough. How a lot of these these teams and stuff were financed by these guys.
Well, and then you get in the whole betting thing, and then you get in betting around sports.
Sure, and then you can
lend itself
into
to
that.
some
Sure, absolutely.
Some shenanigans that could really head down a shenanigan kind of road there.
So that a lot of these philanthropists, they put their money into baseball teams, they put their money into community organizations.
Yeah.
And one of John Roxborough's biggest, one of his business partners, Everett Watson, was the guy that financed the Detroit Stars. Who played it? Which was the Detroit's Negro League team.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's how close these guys are to the world of sports and what's going on. So, anyways, John Roxborough was interested in potentially invest in some money, into boxing or whatever, especially when he sees this young guy from Detroit that's just out knocking people out. Yeah. And so there's like, Stanley Evans had just beaten Joe, but by points, he didn't knock Joe out. And they're like, John Rox was like, this is a guy, he's young and this and that, but he's like, but I want the guy who's knocking people out. We can develop him, like one fight's one fight, but a guy that's this. So anyway, he then approaches Joe, and he's approached, he's introduced to Joe, and then John Roxborough ends up bankrolling Joe. Like by bankrolling, what I mean is that, in order for a boxer to do what he's got to do, he's got, he can't be working 9 to 5 every day. He's got, if you can give, every advantage you can give somebody so they can take the next step up is a huge thing.
Right.
And so John Roxborough is paying, putting money in Joe's pocket so he doesn't have to work.
A lot of these, we talked about that with those football players and the baseball players. They had other part-time jobs just to make ends meet.
Yeah, but Joe, so here, Joe had just won the 1933 Detroit Gold Gloves. And so now the mentality is next year you're going to win it. You're not going to just win the novice class. You're going to win the Open, and then you're going to go to Chicago and win that.
Yes.
But in order to to take the next step towards the pro career, but in order for Joe to do that, he had to train. He couldn't get beat by Stanley Evans types anymore. He had to win. He had to be trained. So he had to be able to be free to train, as much as possible. He had to eat good, to develop his body,
Sure.
and so John Roxborough would bring him over to his dinner table and feed him steak.
No more hot dogs, because we mentioned before.
That's all he grew up on.
He knew the only meat he knew was hot dogs.
Yeah. Richard Back has a section in his book where he talks about it. He actually says, Joe grew up on a diet of hot dogs and ice cream. And when Roxborough came along, that's when he switched to steak. That was the steak and actually in vegetables. That's when he first started eating, good meals so he could really, develop his body.
Right.
And dedicate himself to the science of boxing.
Wow, okay.
And then Roxborough took him shopping for like this, new gloves and new shoes.
Well, his shoes
and
were tatters.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The guy's walking around in rags. So he's getting him all the stuff that he needs to really become a boxer.
Wow.
And he's got him a bunch of hand-me-down suits that Roxborough, didn't need anymore. He gave him some suits to wear to start to look sharp and to look the part a little bit. And there was a brief moment, however, I just want to throw this in there. There was a brief moment where Roxborough was going through a divorce, and so he actually had to pull back on his giving the money to Joe, and actually got Joe a job temporarily at I think it was Briggs. But it didn't last too long. You know what I mean? Joe kind of didn't even go, and just was able to scrape up a little bit of money to just kind of fluff that off and to keep on training.
Sure.
But anyway, so entering the 1934 Detroit Gold Gloves. So I kind of want to just read. I want to read a section out of Richard Back's book because it really describes the ensuing series of events for the 1934 Gold Gloves and, of course, the 1934 Chicago Gold Gloves. The two of them. So I just want to read us this section out of here because he really has a good, just sort of a really colorful description of how it all went down. So all right. So okay. So empowered by Roxborough's largesse and inspired by the fine things he saw attached to success, he marched through a half dozen young men to become Detroit's 1934 Gold Gloves light heavyweight title holder in the open class. This time around, Joe and several of his friends fought for Mount Olivet Baptist Church. He started his quest by bombing Chico Golden with an opening round left hook that the Free Press described as a masterpiece. Golden, a strong, rugged lad, was out for quite a while. Mark Belterre, then a prep school student, was at the Naval Armory that night. He hit the guy so hard they didn't even bother to count him out, recalled Belterre, who later worked for the Detroit News and the Free Press. I remember the sound of his head hitting the floor. He laid there like a pancake while the doctor climbed over the ropes to help him. He eventually came around, but what I remember best thinking is, holy God. And then the fight being over. It was incredible. I've been to a lot of fights before and since, but I have never seen anything quite like it. I was absolutely amazed that anybody could hit that hard. So over the next several weeks, Joe and his nemesis, Stanley Evans, zipped past the elimination rounds, both knocking out all of their opponents through the semifinals. On the cold evening of February 16th, they met at Olympia Stadium for the title. Evans, who worked at Briggs while he wasn't representing the Highland Park Amateur Boxing Club, went into the fight as a slight favorite, due mainly to his victory over Joe the previous summer. He was described as a rugged mauler who can take a punch as well as deliver one. But cool, skillful Joe prevailed, reported the next day's Free Press. Lewis got the jump on Evans. Boxing carefully, he won the first round. In the second, he landed a terrific left hook to Evans' jaw while the two were in the midst of a heated exchange. A right followed, and Evans slipped to the floor. He was up without taking a count, however, and battled gamely for the remainder of the round. In the third round, Evans, evidently realizing that he was behind, came out of his corner determined to slug it out with Joe. Joe, knowing he had won the first two rounds, played safe. He lost the final round after much hard slugging, but still had enough of an advantage to take the decision at the finish. So that's a hard fight that he fought against Stanley Evans to win that championship in Detroit. That's one of the things that's kind of like doesn't get it really enough attention is that fight against Stanley Evans, who was like, that was like the first main fight that he had to overcome was getting past a guy that had beat him the previous summer. I mean, Evans was listed as a slight favorite in the odds. Mm-hmm. So now Joe proceeds on to Chicago. This is where we're talking about the Nationals.
On to Chicago.
So Joe's won the the Detroit Gold Gloves. Now he's headed to Chicago for the 1934 Gold Gloves. So Joe then carried his lethal wallop to Chicago, where he and 7 other Detroit Gold Gloves winners participated in the Tournament of Champions. Golden Glovers had descended on Chicago Stadium Golden Glovers had descended on Chicago Stadium from 9 Midwestern states, with the first night's program alone featuring 140 bouts.
Wow.
7,000 people watched 2 rings in action continuously from 6:30 p.m. to the wee hours of the morning.
Wow.
Joe won his opening matches, flooring Ray Wozniak 4 times and then outpointing Harry Swanson. The next evening, 15,000 howling fans watched him put away Cooney Tucker, a sturdy blonde kid from Fort Wayne, Indiana, with a second-round TKO. When the official intervened, the Hoosier was receiving a severe beating, reported the Free Press's Charlie Ward. In the first round, one of Lewis's right headshots almost dropped him. In the second, Joe rocked him several times with right crosses, left hooks, and right uppercuts. It isn't likely that he could have finished the round, and the referee performed an act of mercy in ending hostilities when he did. Joe blasted his way to the National Gold Gloves title when the tournament concluded in early March. In the semifinal match, he almost punched Ario Soldati of Rockford, Illinois, out of the ring. He easily handled Cleveland's Joe Bauer in the title bout, winning over the crowd of nearly 22,000 with a display of skill and sportsmanship. Lewis was given a tremendous ovation as he left the ring, wrote Jack Carveth. He established himself here as the greatest amateur in the country. His clean-cut victory might have ended in a knockout had not Lewis refused to cut loose when he had his opponent on the ropes.
Wow. So this was all in one night?
Well, it's over the course of, I think, a couple different nights. Yeah.
Okay. I was like, holy crap, he's got to do more than one fight a day?
I think it lasted over the course of like a week.
Okay.
But the first night, there was 15,000. First night was 7,000 fans, 140 bucks. So the first couple nights is where you separate all the chaff.
Sure,
but everyone fighting in the fight was a champion from a different city.
Right. Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's
this,
like
you're pulling all this out of the
Richard Back's, the Great Black Hope.
I got it up there.
Yeah, it's a tremendous
folks,
book, absolutely. And so, anyways. So it's just a great thing. So you see,
how would Evans have done if he had beat Joe?
Well,
would he have been powering through like Joe was?
Well,
do you think?
I don't know, but at this point, Joe was backed by John Roxborough, and Evans is going to be one of the champions that we're going to get back to him.
Oh,
he's one of the 35 champions that's going to come out.
He's not done with him.
No,
okay.
Evans was a great fighter. He ended up. He just didn't have. I don't think that he had the pure knockout lethality like Joe Louis did.
Okay.
You see what I'm saying? Like Joe, whereas Evans, this was, that was one of the fights that determined which direction which fighter was going to go on to the next level, was going to go to Chicago and win, and fight in that tournament. It was going to decide which guy was going to do that, and Joe was the one that took that home. You see. But there's one thing I wanted to point out there, which is essential, and I actually highlighted it before I shut the book.
All right, sorry.
No, it's I already read that. I already read it, but I want to emphasize something.
Hit it again, yeah, right.
I want to hit it again. It's the very last sentence that I said, which is written here. His clean-cut victory might have ended in a knockout. This is the final championship bout. His clean-cut victory might have ended in a knockout had not Joe Louis refused to cut loose when his opponent was on the ropes.
Right.
His opponent was helpless, and Joe didn't finish him off.
Right.
He had mercy for his opponent.
Sure.
And as much as it's like, well, that's Joe's a nice guy. You want to beat up somebody when they're down. But as we're going to see, as this Joe's story unfolds, that is going to be something that has got to be rid out of his system because this is what makes such a tremendous, like a story over this movie, is Joe was a genuinely nice guy. But what he's going to realize, what his promoters are going to realize as his story unfolds, is that he cannot be a nice guy in the ring.
Sure, yeah,
when he is in the ring, he is a black boxer in an era that doesn't want to give him a chance. That the referees, if there is they at least it was felt at this time.
If there's a split decision, he's not winning.
There you go. That he's not going to advance his career continuously. He's not going to make it to the top.
He's got to lay these guys down.
He's got to lay them out. And they actually told him your fists have to be your referee. That's what he's got going against him. And that's what that's where these issues come in for him.
Because if you leave it to points on a scorecard,
exactly, he could get
the other person wins.
Exactly,
yeah.
and so he has got to knock these guys out.
Definitive.
And the other thing too is he's got to put on a show. He's not a flashy guy, so his show has got to come from the lethality of his fists. And if it and what fight fans want, what they pay to see. They pay to see blood. They pay to see knockouts. You see what I'm saying? That's what Joe. So this is what as good as he was. That story right there. And you're gonna. This is not the first time.
Sure.
It's gonna happen. Several more times where his trainers, the more people we're gonna introduce as we go along, are gonna sit there and say, Joe, I know it sucks to knock somebody out that's in La La Land. But you got to put them down. These guys they didn't come here to watch a medically ended fight or a TKO.
Yeah.
They came here to watch somebody's face hit the canvas.
Right. I'm laughing because I just remember in the when Mike Tyson and his fights and all the pay-per-views, right?
Yeah.
And it was like Mike Tyson from Las Vegas, and people pay just all this money for the pay-per-view, $200, $300 for the pay-per-view.
Why'd you watch
rights.
it?
And then it's like 20 seconds.
Knockouts. but the people are going, that was a great fight. It was an amazing fight.
It was 20 seconds.
It doesn't matter.
$100
yeah.
a pay-per-view for 20 seconds.
But you got to see electricity. You see what I'm saying? Like, there's...
I'm just saying it's fun. It just cracks me up.
But the thing is about it is,
and he did. I don't know how many times he did that. It was the pay per view, and he's just crushed the person.
Oh
and
yeah,
the fight
I
was
grew up
over
watching
under
Tyson.
a minute. I know.
I grew up watching Tyson. And it was like sort of like another. It was like you just turn on your sports. Like there's Tyson knocking another guy out. I remember I tuned into him on the radio. There was like a radio fight, and I tuned in for it was him against another Michael. I remember.
Yeah.
And they were like Mike Tyson versus Michael such and such and I remember listening on the radio, and it was like a minute and a half. It was over. Like, he's down, he's out, he's knocked out, 10 count, he's over. I was like, dang, man, he is a beast,
All right, so we got to fill the rest of this time with something.
But then the next crowd will be twice as big because there's going to be big, and then basically, because that's what they're coming to watch.
Is he going to be able to? Is he going to be able to knock him out in 10 seconds again?
Or just knock him out in general? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And boxing, just like any sport, is about star power. I mean, if you have a superior baseball team like Babe Ruth, for instance, the Yankees were clobbering people back in the 30s. Man, they're blowing teams out and winning. Setting records for numbers of wins in a season. People gravitate to winners.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so your team just blew somebody out. It wasn't a competitive game, but that the dominance of your team is why you're there and why it's so awesome. Your dominance of that fighter.
Yeah. And so Joe really struggled with that early on.
Yes.
He's
a nice guy. He didn't want to hurt anybody.
I'm gonna win. I don't have to.
There's no reason to finish this guy. He's not even conscious. He's standing up on his feet and he's dazed and I don't. It's. Ref's going to end the fight for me. I don't need to land that killer knockout. I might hurt the guy.
Yeah.
That's his mentality. I mean, and the thing is about it, that's another, I mean, it's a negative inside the ring, but I mean, it's sort of a clue into, the type of person Joe Louis was, which was that he was a genuinely nice guy. He didn't want to hurt anybody, but this is what he did for a career. It's actually kind of
you're in a funny occupation for a nice
guy.
For a
nice guy, yeah. That's what I mean, really it is. He's like, Joe's like, well, I don't want to hurt anybody. He's like, well, you're also in a blood sport, for survival. That guy wants to murder you, So anyways, so Joe wins this 34.
So he wins the 34 Golden Gloves?
Yeah, so he wins the 34, not only the local, but the nationals.
Right.
So now like the guy said in the quote there, Joe is emerged as the number one amateur boxer in the country. And so he would there was one more little incident that sort of happened. So he would
All right,
so
hurry
he
it
would
up. The street lights are on, man.
Which street
kidding.
lights?
I'm kidding.
Okay.
I'm kidding.
I thought they were all packing up. They're all packing up here.
Kidding. No, the bar's
so
open
it's at
late
this
now.
moment that you mentioned Charlie Ward, as a newspaper writer there, begins to call him the Brown Bomber. It's at this point that the name Brown Bomber is going to start to associate with Joe Louis.
Okay.
In growing intensity, the longer
Did you
his
find
career
the
goes
first
on.
was the first instance of that you found in print?
I don't necessarily have that. I'm going again by what Richard Back says in his book.
Yep. All right.
And so
So is that right after the Golden Gloves?
Yeah,
it was
it's
the
right
Brown
it's
Bomber?
right at that time.
Well, because
so.
how many bouts did he have to go through there in
I don't
Chicago?
have that. I don't have that information. But there's it's a ton.
It was a
it's
series of
scrum.
fights.
Yeah, it's
through,
a scrum. I think Richard Back said 8. There was, what did he
that
say?
sounds like
6?
a week's worth of work.
I think there was like 6 different guys he had to fight that he had to get through. I think that's what he said in that quote. So anyways, so he moved on. So the next thing, there was a national AAU championship in St. Louis, and but he had hurt his hand either in the Chicago Gold Gloves or in something that happened afterwards, so he didn't get to fight in that. But then there was an international championship in Chicago where they brought over these fighters from across the world to face him, that Joe would become the international boxing champion.
Okay.
And it was supposed, as Richard Back says in his book, it was supposed to be the capstone of what Joe Louis had done at this point. However, some really shady things happened. Okay, the fight was in this championship was in Chicago, and it was against a Polish team of very talented
Something
Polish
shady
fighters.
in Chicago?
Yeah, right. So
Just say it ain't
first time
so.
ever. Yeah, yeah. So, anyways, and so Joe goes to the weigh-in, and they weigh him up, and he is disqualified from fighting in the tournament because he was 2 ounces over the 170-pound light heavyweight limit.
I'll be right back. I'm just gonna go.
Well, they say that it was, Richard Braxton's book, it was potentially caused by a drink of water that he had like an hour before the fight. It was like that much of a difference. But there's also some people who say that the scale was messed up and that there was such and such. And that,
But
and
2 ounces, they DQ him off of 2 ounces.
And some people were saying, "Hey, can we just waive the 2 ounces?" And then the guy who was in charge of the fight said no. Like,
Can you give me 10 minutes?
They're like,
I'm gonna jog around the block and
said no.
use the
'Cause it's
toilet.
the official weigh-in.
Yeah.
And so he was disqualified from the nationals at that moment. And so then this was even more messed up is that so he didn't even get to watch the fight happen.
Could it be? Was this possibly race based?
There's potentially that, of course.
Yeah,
Of course
yeah,
there
yeah.
was. And so, but there's another thing too, which is, and I'll get to this, is when Joe went to go watch the actual fight, the championship fights, the police came into the arena and arrested him. And they arrested him for they were looking for some, I think it was, and this is, again, it's all out of Richard Back's book, that they arrested Joe out of the crowd because they said that they were like, that he matched the description of like a guy that I think it was from Kansas or something. That it was like he matched a profile of a guy who was like some big criminal somewhere else. And Joe's like, I was 15 years old when that happened. Like that was 3 years ago. I was a kid in Detroit.
Yeah.
And so they released him.
Right.
And so so that's when Richard Back is speculating in here, in speculation at the time, was that there was these Chicago gamblers that had money on this Polish boxing group.
Right.
And that they were no way they were going to let Joe fight these guys and demolish them. And so Joe's replacement, they had better odds of making money if Joe wasn't fighting. And so Joe, so that was the case. But one of the key components of this, which is important to know, that's why I mention it here, is that Joe didn't make a fuss throughout this entire thing. He didn't scream in the middle of the arena, "What are you doing? Leave me alone!" He didn't go crazy and start swearing at people, swearing at the judge, swearing at the detectives. He just was totally calm and just kind of like, he was scared, of course, but he wasn't. But he didn't like flip out and act crazy and be like, "Oh, this is an idiot. I didn't deserve it." He just went with the flow, went with the sort of system, got released, and came back. And so that reveals another sort of component of something that's going to come into play with him, with his character, which is that he was not this flamboyant, crazy,
he wasn't volatile.
No, he wasn't perfect word. He was not volatile. He wasn't going to, he's not going to cause any kind of disturbance. And that, again,
that probably played in his favor
when we're talking about the
forward.
Jack Johnson concept, where what do you think Jack Johnson would have been saying?
Oh yeah,
he would have been losing his friggin' mind.
Yeah.
And so that's what I'm saying.
I'll fight you. I'll fight these 10
take him
cops.
out. He might have been
Let's
punching
go.
him in the arena before he got arrested. Who knows?
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is, once again, these are this is an attribute that that you can sort of glean these type of attributes from these moments. And so, anyways, following, so he didn't win the international championship, which was, too bad. It would have been a nice, sort of capstone to that story. And so that's in May when that international championship happens. And then in June, Joe has one more amateur knockout, one more fight, just sort of is like a side fight when he gets back to Detroit, and it's a knockout. And so that fight that he had in June of 1934 left Joe's amateur record at 50 wins, 4 losses, with 43 knockouts.
Oh, jeez.
40. So does that put the exclamation point on what John Roxborough is seeing with this kid fighter? Yeah, he had 4 losses early on when he first started against Johnny Myler. Do you think Johnny Myler's going to come back and fight him now? You know what I mean? Like 50 wins, 43 of those are knockouts.
Somebody cue the LL Cool J.
Yeah, this is...
Mama said knock you out.
Yeah. Well, you need to have that on screen so you can hit the button and hit it in, right? So this is the fighter that people are looking at, right? This is the fighter. 43 knockouts in his 50 wins. This is what draws a crowd.
Yeah.
You see?
Yeah.
And that's what John Roxborough is seeing. And so after this fight, this last like sort of amateur fight he has, Joe Louis decides to turn pro.
Okay.
And so he tells John Roxborough, and John Roxborough's like, well, hold on a second. Let's have one more year, because keep in mind, he had competed as a light heavyweight throughout the Chicago, these Gold Gloves.
Sure,
and Joe
sure.
wants to go become a pro, a heavyweight pro.
Right.
And
And
so-
so he's like right there at the cusp.
Yes,
He's
and he
2
says, well,
ounces into heavyweight.
Exactly. So John Roxborough's like, well, next year, let's have
beef
one
you
more
up a little
year.
bit.
Let's beef you up a little bit. Let's get some muscle on you. And next year, you're going to go through the Detroit, Chicago, and then the international at the full heavyweight.
Right.
And you're going to win all that. And then you're going to be, you can get any fight you want. Sort of
But
thing,
Joe
you know?
wanted to go pro?
He said he needed the money. It was time to go pro, and so he convinced John
Him
Roxborough.
and his 16 siblings.
Yeah, exactly. He needs money, and so
Yeah.
he says, "I want to go pro now."
Sure.
And so with that, he convinced John Roxborough, but John Roxborough is in absolutely no position to to train Joe and to do the next level to go pro is going to require some people that have some serious. That have some experience with the fight game.
Sure.
Right? They need a real trainer, a professional trainer. He needs a professional manager, somebody that really knows some of these ins and outs of this fight game and knows how to deal with the contracts and deal with booking fights and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So that's what we're going to be talking about in the next episode is where we talked about Ben Turpin and John Roxborough, two of these big influences at this point in his life, and there's going to be two more major influences, both of whom are going to come into play in the next part of our story, which is those two people are Julian Black and Jack Blackburn. That's who we're going to be talking about in the next episode. At this moment, I wanted to sort of one last little thing to point out. At this moment, so when Joe was fighting for the 1934 Detroit Gold Gloves, and actually more specifically the 34 Chicago Gold Gloves, at that moment, the 1934 Tigers are in spring training.
Okay.
So they're in spring training. So right about the time that Joe is about to turn professional. Okay, right after he's 150 fights and he's talking.
Is this when Mickey entered or his second season?
Mickey's first year.
Okay.
So the Tigers haven't made their big come out yet. Right? The Tigers are nobodies, just like Joe is.
They were stinking up the field.
So the Tigers
last
are
year,
nobodies, and Joe's still a nobody,
Okay.
really, right? I mean, he's an up and coming amateur, but there's
Sure.
nothing more than that.
Right.
And so I'm trying to kind of show the context of where we're at in this story.
Okay.
And so when Joe, just as Joe is about to decide, just as he's deciding to turn pro and actually having the conversation with John Roxborough about going pro, at that exact moment, the Detroit Lions are coming to Detroit. The announcement was July 22nd, 1934, when we showed the illustration of the lion jumping through the hoop.
Yeah.
Where the actual official announcement in the newspaper that the Detroit was going to have an NFL team. It's right at this moment that the Lions are announcing the fact that in 1934, in the fall, they're going to play their first season. Right. So you can see these teams. The Red Wings are they begin play later on in the year, but. It's at trying to put
Were
put
the
in
Red
the
Wings still the
context.
Cougars, or were they?
No, they're the Red Wings.
They're the Red
absolutely.
Wings.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
But you can kind of see. So the Tigers are nobodies. The Lions are nobodies. Joe Louis is a nobody.
Right.
The Red Wings are nobodies at this
The city's
point.
asleep still.
Exactly. So the city's
Time
asleep.
to wake the Giants.
Exactly. But that's you see what I'm saying. But you see how all of these forces.
Right.
1934 is such a critically important to understand 35 because it's essentially important to see how in 34. At these, the Tigers, of course, would grow. Come May, June, July, the Tigers would just become, they would come right out of the gate, going and fascinate the entire city.
Yeah.
But there's this one sort of point, at this moment where all this stuff is just starting to happen. And nobody knows about these guys. They're nobodies at this point, and they're starting to come out. So in the screenplay that I wrote, this is what we focus on. There's each of these subjects has the 1934 subject, a story of them in 1934, and then the story of them in 35. And so, we're going to keep on talking about Joe in 1934 in the next episode.
Awesome. All right, so most of this is coming out of Richard Bach's book.
Well, yeah,
there,
his early
the
life
Great
experience. So
Black
we'll
Hope.
get back to my book certainly,
Right.
but
I'll just put it up for folks. We talked about it a couple of times, and I finally put the graphic.
But
up
I mean,
for
I
it.
use a lot of what Richard Bach does just for understanding,
Sure.
who Joe was in 34 as the primer for the 35.
Yep.
You draw on a range of sources when you're talking about this stuff, and it's Richard Bach's one of the guys I've never met him, and I'd love to meet him one of these days. I read his first book I read was there was a book on Ty Cobb that he did, which was like one of my first favorite books.
Yeah.
And so as I'm saying, like he's like the dean of Detroit sports. He really is.
Yeah.
And, the Joe Louis book is just sensational, and if you can't wait to hear what happens in the next episode, go out and get Richard Bach's book.
Richard's got you covered.
Yeah,
man.
Richard, I mean, my book. I talked about the 34. We're starting to get into my territory with the book too.
Yeah.
Where I start to really pick up in 34. I mean, I kind of glaze over some of the early stuff that we talked about there with the Chicago tournaments and stuff like this.
Mm-hmm.
But he does a nice little, fuller detail.
And that's why I like that we can do this, hitting the stuff that you had to omit from your book. Just, I mean, you only have so many column inches.
Yeah, because my main focus was 30. I mean, I did talk about 34, but specifically 35. But I did do the primer for each year in 34 and kind of a quick rundown. And so, I mentioned in my book about the Chicago Gold Gloves
the
and stuff
foundation
like this.
and Jack Johnson and everything we had to lay in for that.
Yeah, but the details that he puts in this, that we can draw on these different range of sources and really take our time with this stuff and actually explore.
I'm loving this, man.
I am too. Yes, for sure. We actually get to do an entire show on the Gold Glove tournaments, which is super cool. And by the way, when you want one of the things that was cool about the Gold Gloves, they used to draw people into wanting to participate was the fact that you actually won a little Gold Glove pin to wear on your shirt.
Nice.
So imagine you're walking around Detroit in the 30s and you got a Gold Glove pin on your shirt.
Yeah.
You're like you're like the coolest kid on the block, man,
So earlier today, running another podcast, and there was a former Detroit Piston here, Rob Griffith. He did a very short Piston career. Nice guy, though. And he was like, so what else do you do? And I was telling him about this podcast about the City of Champions. And he was like getting excited about this story. He's like, "Can I come and hang out sometime?" I'm like, "Oh yeah, Rob, you
absolutely
sit down." He's got great pipes too. The guy's got a great voice. I just want him to come in and talk.
Yeah, tell him to come
He's
in.
funny too.
We're telling stories about all this stuff.
So it's just taking the time with the story and telling the story, and even just I just gave him that elevator pitch about it, and he got excited about it. So I'm glad that everybody's hanging out, getting excited about the story with us. We appreciate you. So subscribe, leave a comment, collect.
Share this basket. Take it. If you're still, if you're listening to us right now, do us at this exact moment. I've been finding myself on YouTube in this when the actual broadcaster says, "Take this moment right now and hit the thumbs up or the share button, like right now.
Please
do it
that.
right now.
Please.
Don't wait for us to do
Don't
it right
wait.
now.
Do it now. Subscribe wherever fine podcasts are sold. If you're not subscribed to it as a podcast, you can subscribe to it. Subscriptions are free. Not just the first one. We're not crack dealers. Nope, they're all free.
Yeah, they're all free. But we're gonna try to hook you with those first ones, just like drugs.
No paywall. No paywall. It's all free. It's all for you. Because this story belongs to the city, and I want to give it back to the city.
We want to give it back, and we want to bring it back in a big way.
Yep.
So I mean, and the thing is that
at the very least, we get to hang out for the week and talk about the stories.
Yeah, and it doesn't. And we said it before,
that's
the story doesn't, just because I got the books on it or whatever, and we're doing the show, this story doesn't belong to either one of us. It doesn't belong to me. It belongs to all of us.
Yeah.
And it's a story that what other story that has been forgotten or deserves its place in the pantheon of heroes and achievements of this city that has gone, that has gotten less attention and deserves more. The differential between the attention it's gotten and the attention that it deserves is so out of whack that it's going to take a collective group of people to make this happen. And it's like, like I say, so anything you can do to share, whatever. If you know somebody that's interested, if you know somebody that's got ideas or connections or anything that can make this thing happen and help us take this thing to the next level, hook us up, man.
Sure. Share it. Share it with people you like. Share it with people you hate. Just share it. All right. Till next time, we'll do it again. Put them up.
Yeah, you got it. What's that from? What's that from?
Wizard of Oz.
Oh, that's right. It is.
Cowardly Lion.
Cowardly Lion. That's right.
Put them up.
Yeah.
All right. See you guys next time.